How's the sound? Okay, let's see if anybody's here so far. Today we're going to talk about the MKS Gen L, and we're going to try and look at some possible things that break while using it. So the first thing I want to do is actually set up one of the steppers, and then we'll move it across and see what the errors are. But I'll give everybody a second to catch up here. Essentially, we're going to troubleshoot some problems on the MKS, because I seem to be getting a lot of questions on it the last couple of days. So we're going to start with stepper drivers. And the first one we have is a TMC 2208. And I'll grab the other one now. I might have to set up some stuff here. So it's going to take a second to get everything aligned. So I need to grab some stepper drivers. So here's the TMC 2209. I'll let you see what it looks like here, and I'll zoom in on it so you can see. So this is the stepper, and what we need to think about when using it is the actual configuration of the stepper. So I'm going to zoom in. Give me a second here to see what I'm doing. And what we have here is a close-up of the stepper. And as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, there's an EN pin right here. That's the enable pin. It's located on the board here, 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 and here. That's an important pin to align. So actually I didn't show you where they were, so I'll do it again, but I'll also show you a schematic or a pinout diagram. So the end stop or EN pin is here, here for the Y axis, here for the Z axis, here for the E0 axis, and here for E1. That's important when setting up the stepper. You don't want to plug it in backwards. So you want to line those pins up and then place it in. The other thing about the pins is you have pins here for diagnostic pins that align to these two. So now that we know that, we'll go over and we'll actually check to see what it is in the browser. So over on the browser, as you can see, I'm on the MKS website for version 2. So let's look at hardware, and I think it's this one. So we'll look at the pinouts. So as you can see here, we have the pinouts. They don't show exactly where the enable pins are, but that's fine. But you can see where you have SPI and UART that need to be set. In this case, we're using UART. So we need to go back to the wiki and see if we can figure this out. So they have a wiki up here. And then they talk about each one of their things. So what we need to find is the setting for this. So down here they talk about this being a component of it. This is what you need to jump in order to use sensorless homing. So if you scroll down here, you can see that they're talking about the jumper caps for UART down here, and this is where the jumper needs to be placed. So let's double check the board and see what it looks like. These are two possible things that can go wrong. So let me grab the dental pick here. So here's the actual jumper for UART that I just took out right here as it moves around the table. So we need to place it on these two pins right here. So as you can see, well, let me align this better. Okay, that looks fine. Then there's the jumpers over here that need to be in place when you're working with it. So the x-axis is right here for the sensorless homing. So you have to put that one in place as well. That'll allow sensorless homing instead of using the Z minimum. So if we take this, which we normally would run with a fan, but I have heat pins on it right now because we're not going to run it too long. That will go in like so, where the enable pin is over here. So now that we've got that set up, let's plug in the actual stepper, which is right here. So this is the x-axis for the NEMA stepper that's off over here. Then you have Y, Z1, Z2, E1, and E2. So this is E1, E0. So first extruder, second extruder is what I'm trying to say. So if you go back, there's 2 for the Z-axis and 1 for the Y. So we know we're in the right place. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to screw these in for power. Now it's currently unplugged. And if you can't see too well, I marked the actual power over here. And that's red. So to double check it, we can go over to the actual web page and check out the pinout diagram. So let's do that real quick. So if we're over here, and we go back to the wiki, hardware, this version of the board, and then if you look down here, they can, let me zoom in actually. You can see that it's minus and plus for bed, and then it's plus and minus for power. So it's either 12 or 24 volts. So let's go back over the actual thing that we're working on, and let's double check that. So it kind of rubbed off the color. So I'm gonna actually darken it up here so I can see it. So that's the actual voltage point that I'm working with. So to connect this, you're going to slide it in here. These may need to be unscrewed if they're not already. And you're going to tighten it down. And notice how I'm using ferrule connectors. That's to avoid damaging your board or power supply. And it's also a safety feature because they're encapsulated in a shield. So now that we've got that set up, we're going to connect the USB right here. And it's going to power up via USB. So you hear that beep. So next thing we need to do is actually set up the firmware. And this is a default version of the firmware. So I'm going to go over to the desktop in just a second. Let me just get things lined up here. And I'm going to go to my downloads folder. And inside my downloads folder, I just downloaded the copy of Marlin at 6 o'clock. So I'm going to go and extract the copy. And this will take a few moments. And then we'll go over to VS Code and open it up. So I'll check for questions while that's going on in the general chat. Hola. It's a little quiet to start, I guess. Or is it bueno? Okay, so it's almost extracted. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go over to VS Code. And inside VS Code, what we're going to do is we're going to go over to Explorer. Then we're going to go to Open File or Folder. Go to our Downloads folder, then Marlin 2.0, Marlin 2.0, then Select Folder. Now that we're inside here, things have changed in the last 2 weeks. So there's an INI set of files in an INI folder, and they bring up the .pio, or excuse me, they bring up the platform.io.ini, which allows you to see what the default chipset is currently. It's the Mega 2560. And if you scroll down through here, you're not going to find your board. Generally, it's only going to have one board in it. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the board when we're working with it. But if you look down through here, it may already be in here because it says LPC 17X. But I'll show you how to confirm what it is. So I'm going to minimize this for a second. And I'm going to go over to the Marlin folder, then the source folder, then the core folder, then boards.h. Inside boards.h, I'm going to search on MKS _ sGen, and you can see where they're all starting to pop. So we're going to highlight the one for the second version of the board, and we're going to copy that, and we're going to note what section it's under, which is LPC 1769. So first things first, we're going to set up configuration.h. So we're going to search on motherboard, and we're going to highlight the ramps and paste it. Next, they've changed some other things here. There's now 3 serial ports. So we're only working with the first one right now, so we're going to change that to -1. And that's all we have to do in here unless we're doing TMC steppers. So let's search on A4988. And what they've done at the moment is they've left these uncommented. So what we're going to do is we're just going to change this to TMC 2209 by copying it here and pasting it right here. So now we're set for that axis. So down below, there's a couple of things that you need to know. This is default steps per axis, or default axis steps per unit, pardon me. And these are usually belt driven for the ones that are 80. This one is usually a lead screw, which means like an M8 or a T8. So there's a different angular rise for every revolution. So when it turns one rotation, what'll happen is it'll possibly, in the case of an M8, go up 1.25 millimeters. For a T8 with a pitch of 2, it'll go up 2 millimeters. And for a T8 with a pitch of 1, it'll go up 1 millimeter per revolution, I hope. My calculations may be off, but that's just a roundabout way to talk about it. And then this is your extruder. Now, if you're using the same steppers, which is highly advisable in this case, you'll only need one of these. Otherwise, you'll have to encase them in a certain configuration with parens around them or brackets. But I haven't done that in a while, so it's kind of hard for me to remember how to do it. So I use the same type of stepper and motors to resolve that issue. Now, to set up the TMC 2209, we have to also go over to configuration advanced.h. And I like to search on 800 to get me where I need to be. So this is where our current stepper is that's enabled. If you're using this stepper, you have to keep in mind what your root mean square is, and that's the square root of 2 for anybody that doesn't know, which is 1.414. I can't remember what the square root of 3 is, but it's probably like 1.57 something. I don't know. It's been over 20 years that I've had to think about it. But right now, microstepping, if you're not sure what to do with this, leave this value alone because they're tied together. But if you feel like changing it to where you increase the micro steps, then if I go to 160, it means this has to go to 32 because they're tied together. So now that we understand that, I'm going to set up sensorless homing. So I'm going to search first on TMC_debug. This will set up a debug environment. And I'll hit the control button and the slash to remove the comment. Then I'm going to search for the other one, which is going to be as well TMC debug. And I'm going to do the same with the slash and the control button to remove the comment. Then I'm going to go up for a second so I can find sensorless homing because I'm going to search on that. And that'll bring us hopefully to sensorless homing. Let me try going up one here. There we go. And we'll remove the comment for that to enable it. Down here, this is going to change in a second. So in order to use this, the values are not based on these. That would be for SPI, but they're based on these two right here, being the 255 and 0. The optimal value I found is 125. So now that we're set there, and we're also set for the actual sensorless homing, and we've configured the firmware, we need to compile it. So I'm going to double check by going over to my E drive, and this is the drive where my current build is located. And as you can see, there's a little bit of information in there. There's also last build. If you needed to ever use this, you would right click in lowercase firmware.bin would be the same thing as this, but they call it cur for current. It is a cursor type file for the extension, but the cur is meant to specify that that's your current firmware loaded. So now that we understand that, let's go back over to VS Code. And as you can tell over here, we got to set up the compile. And it's the INI folder we need to go into because our chipset for our default environment is set for the ramps type chipset, being the Mega 2560, which is not our chipset. So we're going to locate the LPC 1768X.ini, and in this case there's only two that are in here, but we know it's the LPC 1769, so we'll copy that. Then we'll go back to the .pio, or excuse me, platform.io.ini, and we'll actually paste the default environment right here. So we're all set there. There is one last thing that you need to check, and obviously when I downloaded this, the default build was partially there, so I'm going to clean it out. And now that that's clean and no longer exists in there, I'm actually going to do a compile. Now this may fail the very first time out. Sometimes things build out of order in the software, so you have to build a second time possibly to rectify that issue. So let's try that. Otherwise, the third time means that there's something broken, which that means go to your very first error and then resolve that. I know it's weird, but actually there's a file that exists up here after the initial compile that helps with the rest of the compile. Don't know which file it is exactly, but you can experiment and find it. But it's a prerequisite for other compiles. That's why you're seeing it having to compile twice. So now that we're set there and it's copied over to the actual drive, or in this case it hasn't because I clicked the checkbox, we can simplify that by clicking the upload button, which won't have to compile the whole thing because it's still in that folder, and it'll just push it across. So let's check now. Now it still doesn't show up. Now that might mean that there's something going on my board, but we can copy it over manually. So let's go over and find it. So I'm going to go back over here and go to the .pio folder. Then I'm going to go to the build folder, LPC 1769. And then our build should exist right here. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to say reveal in File Explorer. Inside here, I'm going to then right click again and I'm going to send it to the E drive. Now let's double check the E drive because I might have my drives mixed up because there was a D drive as well. And as you can see, it's actually on the D drive because it just copied over. So apparently I have two drives in the computer. So I'm going to pull the one that's coming up as E, which is, and I'll show you what it looks like in a second. I had that in the drive. So this was in the drive, so it gave me an extra drive. So now that we've got it actually loaded, we're going to actually flash the firmware by pulling the plug, giving it a second, then plugging it back in. It should start to flash around here, I think. Okay. And let's go back and check the computer to make sure it's okay. So if we go over to here and we check in, hang on, I gotta pull it over, the downloads folder, we can see that it just loaded. So it's working. So let's go back over here. And I'm gonna plug this in a second, but I gotta trace out the actual power supply, so give me a second here. Okay, there we go. So here's the power. So I'm going to power it up. Hopefully we've got everything configured right. So it's now working, or at least we're not seeing any smoke. So we're going to go over to platform.io, or excuse me, not platform.io. I'll wake up in a minute. We'll go over to Pronterface to test this. So I just have to bring it up because it's not up in front. And bring it to where you can see it. So here we are. So it says COM port 1, which makes it kind of confusing because that's probably not going to be the COM port. So we're going to search Device Manager to find it. So there's only one device connected, and the other one on this desktop is for other stuff. So it says COM port 10. COM port 1 is a default COM port on a desktop machine. So we'll close this, and we'll change this to 10. So now that that's set to 10, we'll connect, and we're getting an error. And the reason we're getting an error is because I was working on something earlier and didn't realize that I left it open. So this is what's going on. It grabbed the actual printer in Cura. So I'm going to close this, and then I'm going to connect again. And now it says connecting printer is now online. So that's where the error comes from. So now that we're connected, let's see if we can move the x-axis. It's moving a little fast, which is kind of horrifying, but that's okay. So let's try homing it, and this might be messy because it's a new firmware. So it's homing extremely slow. So there might be something going on with the firmware because it just died. So now we got to figure out what's going on, and I'll check on the chat in 1 second here because I think a lot of people might have questions. But what I just tried to do was home the access, and as you can see, it's moving extremely fast. So there's an issue there. So unfortunately, when it does this right here in printer face, that means that it killed the printer because it seemed like an unsafe state. So let's see if we can figure out what's going on. One of the first places I'd like to check is actually Marlin to see if maybe they changed something. So I'm going to go over to the browser. 2 seconds here. And I'm going to open up a new tab and go to Marlin Firmware. Inside here, I'm going to go to Download. And you can see this is the version that I was working with. But let's go to Reporting an Issue. And let's search on TMC 2209 UART. So it's got a bunch of issues here. So as you can see, there's a lot of stuff about TMC. Now let's see if there's something on MKS. Okay, that narrows it down a little. Baby steps not working with Z offset. Z offset you can set in the firmware, and you can also set inside your slicer. I prefer to do it in slicer if you need to do it. Most of the modern printers now don't need it modified, but that's up to you. So let's see if we can figure out which configuration they're working with. So it's an MKS 32, and it says TMC 2209 in UART mode, pardon me. So we know that there's an issue with this. We may have a related issue. So we're working on the Z, or not Z axis, but the X axis in our case. So they say down here, please test this branch. And this comment was February 16th. So this was before the actual change. Way before. So this is an old version of the firmware. They're probably using 2.0.7.2. We're using 2.0.8.1. So we have a newer version. So there may be a new issue that was created. So now that we know that, let's see if the actual bug is open, which it is. So we know that's not our issue. So let's do a search on MKS Gen L. V2. So this is close to when it was released for the new one, but it just came out. Let's see. Marlin firmware.bin unable to load a second time on VS Code with version. That was me. That's not a bug, by the way. I talked about it a couple of live streams back and what happened. So apparently I don't know what's going on yet, but let me look at the chat, see if anybody else knows. Nobody's your X doesn't move as well, Max. I understand that. Mine just died as well. It moves left to right, but it doesn't home. I can show you the parts cooling in a couple minutes. I'll actually show you on this board. It's a similar process for the MKS as it is for the SKR version 1.4. But I want to troubleshoot this a little bit more. So in order to troubleshoot this, I need to go back over to the configuration. And you're not seeing what I was talking about for the last 10 minutes. That's awesome. Hang on. This is where I actually am. I'll show you how I got there. So down here it says reporting issues. So down here there might be a bug summary that you can look at. Doesn't tell us much, but we're working with the new firmware, and that's why things might seem kind of weird. So we're going to roll back a firmware and see if it works, just to verify our configuration is good. So what we need to do is click over to View Download, and this is kind of weird. You're going to have to go over to Marlin, then go to Marlin, because we were in the actual config file section. And currently, this is the build that was released apparently 2 days ago. It says it's fixing G29K. I don't know what the K stands for. That's new to me. I think it's Kelvin or constant, but I don't know. But the version that we were working with is actually slightly different than 2.0. So we want to see if there's a branch. This might take me a second. I usually flounder about trying to get this right. So that's a new branch. So give me a second here to figure out if I can find it. There we go. So I clicked on tags. So these are tagged builds. So the older build is right here. I don't want to jump to this one because that's already been updated to this within a couple of days. So you can see the progression of time between them. So I'm going to click here. And I'm going to try and figure out how to download it. It may take me a second, but the source code is right here. So I'm going to click on that and I'm going to save it. Then I'm going to go over to my downloads folder, which I got to bring over so you can see. And you can see the old version we just pulled. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to extract all of it. I'll check on the chat while that's going on. So all I'm trying to do is figure out if there's an error that we know about and see if it exists in one version versus the other. So I'm going to pull the power on the board while I'm doing that. And all we're going to do is change the other configuration. So I'm going to go into VS Code, and you can see it just popped up. So I'm going to go to Close Folder, then I'm going to go to Explorer, Open Folder, Downloads, the 2.7.2 folder twice down, then select folder. And all we're going to do is reconfigure it, and I'll do this kind of quick. It's slightly different because you don't have the INI. So I'm going to go to source core boards.h, search on MKS _ sGen, find our board down here, copy it, close out of boards.h, minimize core, source, go to configuration.h, search on motherboard, paste it here, change this to -1. Notice how there's only 2 serial ports in this case. Then I'm going to go over to search on A4988. And I'm going to remove the comment. As you can see, they changed around what they were doing. That may be by mistake or by an actual method to their madness. So TMC 2209. Then I'm going to go down here. I'm going to change this to 160. And I'm going to go over to advanced configuration. Search on 800. A couple of clicks down. I'm going to change this to 32 like I did before. I'm going to search on TMC_debug. I'm going to remove the comment here. I'm going to search for the second one. Remove the comment again. I'm going to go back up twice or up once. Search on sensorless homing. So sensorless homing's right here. Remove the comment. I'm going to change this to 125. Then I'm going to go over to platformio.ini. As you can see, it's different. So I'm just going to type LPC 1769, and that's our chipset. I'm going to do a clean on the .pio again. And then I have to go over to the board for a second. And the reason being is because there's power on it still. And it's in an error state. So I'm going to plug it back in. Then we'll double check to see what's going on. So as you can see, the board just came up. And it just has our last build on it. So we're clean. So let's try doing just to upload. It may fail, but that's okay. Now I'll look at the chat while that's running. Okay, so it did fail, so let's do it a second time. So this is looking better. We'll check on the drive again. And we'll wait and watch and see what happens. So it's probably going to upload to the board this time. There it goes. Okay, so let's go back over to the board. Let's unplug it. Plug it back in. And then we'll check on the computer in a second and see if it loaded, because it's around 6:34 that it reloaded. So let's go back over to the computer. We'll look at a drive over here. Sorry, that's stuff I'm working on. And we'll go to our drive right here. So it did load. We can tell that by the time. So now that we've got that set up, we're going to go back over to the workbench for a second. We're going to power it back up with direct power. Then I'm going to go to to Pronterface. Inside Pronterface, I'm going to reconnect. It says connecting. Let's check TMC, M122 for debug. I actually got to click on it, sorry. And you can see that it says that it's okay. Now I'm going to show you how to make it break. So I'm going to disconnect. I'm going to power down the system. I'm going to pull this cord for a second. Then I'm going to plug it back in. I'm not going to plug in the main power. And I'm going to type, or I'm going to connect first. Then I'm going to do M122 again. So what you see down here is that it's bad. And the reason it's bad is because you don't have power in the system. So if I plug it in, it's now got power. So let's do M122 again and see what happens. And it says okay. So that's one of the issues that occurs. Now let's check the movement. So I'm going to move 10. It's still moving fast, but let's try homing. So it's still not working right. So there is one other issue that I probably missed. And let's see if we can troubleshoot what that is. I believe it's a setting that I forgot about where I have to set something in Marlin that's unusual for this system. So let's go back over to the web page for a second, because obviously I forgot a step. So on the web page for MKS Gen L, we're going to go back, we're going to go to the wiki, and we're going to see what else needs to be set for the TMC 2209, which is right here. So they want you to invert. We can do that. That just means what direction it's going in. They talk about microstepping, UART examples. They may want you to enable EEPROM, and then something about X driver type TMC 2209. That's what we already set earlier when I searched on A4988. Current we're going to leave alone. It does say to set it to 16, so we can do that, but I don't think that's the issue. And then hybrid threshold, I don't think that's the issue either, but we can try those as well. But I think it's something really simple I forgot to do. Let's see, drive IC power. We have the jumper cap set, so let's check that. It's probably not that, but there's a bunch of things that we could look at in here. So let me power down the system. And let's look for the jumper cap. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. So they're talking about the jumper right here. Let me take the power out. Right here. And it's already set to 3.3 volts, so we're good there. We don't have this plugged in backwards, so we know we're good there. So understanding this issue is going to be fun. So that's sensorless homing. That we already set. Chopper, we may look at that. So let's see if that's set. I'm only on a 12 volt system. So let me transition over here. This is what I was actually just talking about. Sorry, I forgot to transition screens. We have sensorless homing. We have the sensitivity. Then we have the chopper timing. And this is for actually stealth chop, I think, but let's see what we can do. So let's go over to VS Code, and we're going to search on what they just said, which is this. So we'll do a Control F, we'll paste it, and we'll see if we can find it. So it's right here. It says it's already set, so we know that's not the issue either. So let's go back and see what else we have. Let's double check our actual jumper, because that might be an issue. So I'm going to go over to the board again. I'm going to pop out the jumper. Just a little warm. I'm going to look at this. Everything's unplugged right now, so let me pop this out. So these two pins are the ones we want to jump, allegedly. So let's try this again. Wow, that's a little warm. So I'm going to plug this in, and I'll plug in the power, which is over here. Then I'll go back over to Prowner Face. I'll reconnect, check the state of the actual stepper, which is okay. We'll move 10. Now it's moving kind of funny. It's still moving fast. So let's try home, and it's going to fail. Okay. So we know it's going to fail. So I'm going to unplug the system for a second. Going to unplug this, and I'm just going to check the heat. So that's a little warm. So something about this is not right, which is understandable. So this is going to take a little bit more time. I've gone through this before, so I know there's a setting in here. Stall sensitivity we don't have to worry about because we already set that down here. So let's go up through here and see if there's certain settings. So they're talking about the LCD there. UART mode, driver IC 3 volts, jumper cap on the X minimum, which I believe is correct. Yep. So what are we missing? So let's try EEPROM settings. I'll show you where I am. So this is what I'm thinking about. We've already done this. Current is 800. We could do micro stepping as 6. Let's do 16 on that. So I'm going to search on 800 from the top. And we'll change this to 16. That might be one of the issues. And then we'll go back to configuration.h and we'll reset this back to 80. And we'll re-upload this. So I got to reconnect the USB. So let's go back over to VS Code and upload. And I'll check on the chat while this is going on. Okay. So this is going to upload any second. There it goes. And what we need to do is go back over to the board. Unplug it. Notice how I'm doing this one step at a time. I just want to check everything once over. Then I'm going to plug it in. I'm going to go back over to Pronterface. I'm going to reconnect. I'm going to check the status. Still says OK. I'm going to try and move the stepper 10, but let me move this over to the center. So it's not as jumpy. So let's try doing a home. And it looks like it's going to fail again. Okay. So we know that's not the issue. So we're going to disconnect here. Disconnect the power. Disconnect the USB. Reconnect the USB. Then we're going to go over to the desktop again. Go over to VS Code, and we're going to check the web browser real quick. So we're set here. So they're saying enable low speed stealth chop. So let's search on this value. I don't think this is the issue. I think it's EEPROM. So maybe we'll try EEPROM first. So we'll search on EEPROM. And as you can see, it's disabled, so we'll re-enable it by removing the comment. Then what we'll do is we'll click the checkbox, or actually we'll just do an upload, pardon me. And I'll look over at the chat. So this is like really basic troubleshooting for me. I may know what the issue is, but I'm not going to tell you. I'm just trying to show you the things that you might want to look for. Or I've completely forgotten how to do this. But now that it's uploaded, let's double check to see it got there. It is. So we'll go over to the board. We'll unplug this. We'll plug it back in. We'll plug in the power. now that it's powered up, in interface we'll connect, or we'll connect now. Well, let's see, something's wrong. So this just crashed. You can see it's not responding in the upper left hand corner. Let me just make that so you can see better. So it's not responding, so I'm going to kill it, close the program. I'm going to power down the system. I'm going to disconnect the USB for a second, reconnect the USB, wait for the beep. Apparently there is no beep, so I'm going to disconnect again and reconnect. So the COM port might be in use still. So this is what's going on. I'll show you. So if we go over to Device Manager, there might be an enumeration issue occurring in Windows, which may mean a reboot when this happens. But if we go over to COM ports, we don't see it. So we've lost our COM port. Oh, maybe we just got it back. No, we lost it again. So one of the things you can try and do is you can try and see if there's a hidden resource. But I don't know if we'll see it, but we do see an Adreno that's hidden. And the COM port is free. So let's disconnect again. Reconnect. I may have to swap COM ports, and if things start to get funny, you'll know why. So let me check on Device Manager one last time before trying to fix this. So we don't see it. So I'm going to disconnect the other end of the USB and connect it into a different port, and this is where it might get a little bit weird. So if the camera goes out or anything like that, let me know. I'll check on the chat while that's going on. Okay, so let's check on Device Manager, see if we got anything. Let me make sure you can see what I'm seeing. COM ports, so we have a COM port 10 again. So let's go back over to interface. Reconnect. It already is defaulted to 10, so let's connect. And it says it's online. So let's try and move it 10. Now it's moving normally all of a sudden. Okay, let's try a home. So the last thing that I changed was EEPROM. So I think that's the issue that's causing a lot of issues for people. And I gotta double check my tutorial because this may have worked when I did it way back when. But that was the issue in this case. The inverting, obviously, we can change and fix so that it homes in the right direction. I'll show you how to do that real quick. But let me show you actually what's going on. So I know you missed part of this, so it moves normal. This is with EEPROM. So now I'll home it. And it's a little bit off on its homing, but it homes. So apparently EEPROM is our issue. So let's go and fix the homing on this real quick. So I'm going to go over to the desktop for a second. Go over here. I'm going to search on invert. So let's see what we got here. So it's the XDIR, so we're going to say true instead of false, if I can spell it. And we're going to upload that to the board. And we'll double check to make sure it's working right. So different boards do slightly different things. You can see it right here. So now to set this up, we got to go back over to the workbench. I'm going to disconnect the main power, place it over here for a second, pull the plug, reconnect the plug, reconnect the power. Okay, once that's connected, we'll go back over to Pronterface. Inside Pronterface, we'll disconnect, reconnect. It says it's online. We'll do an M122. And it's okay. So let's try moving the X again. Let's try homing. And so now it homes in the right direction. So that's how you resolve some of the issues with your steppers. This board's slightly unusual. I believe the other one doesn't require EEPROM, which is rewritable memory. But that solves that issue. Now there was a question about fans, so we'll try that. So I'm going to disconnect the power. Going to disconnect the USB power. And we're going to figure out fans, because I know a lot of people want to see a second fan. So I've got to grab one over here, and I got to check the connector. So I'm going to pop out the... Let me get this so you can see better. Now the camera might click off in a second, so I'm going to power cycle it real quick. And then I'm going to take out the stepper, place it over here for a second so I can expose these pins, because they're fan pins over in the upper left-hand corner of the board. And then we're going to go back over to the browser. And inside the browser, we're going to look for the mechanical design. So the pinouts. Whoops, I went too far. So I'm going to click over here, go to hardware, go to this version of the board, and pins. And then I'm going to scroll in a little, see if I can see them. Apparently it's not giving us a pinout diagram like I would like, meaning I don't know what these are, but it says J5 and J6. So these are actual connections numerically, but they're not pins like over in here. So these fans are just direct power, and these fans over here are the ones that we can control power. So we have fan 1, fan 2, then we have these two fans that are just power, and there might be another fan on the board, but these are the two I see. So we're going to do fan 1 to turn on power. So it's P2.4. And we'll confirm that in just a second. So this is going to be slightly different for the SKR version 1.4, but the process is the same. So I'm going to go over to VS Code. And inside VS Code, we're going to do some confirmation of this. So I'm going to go to Source, Pins. It's an LPC 1769 is the setup that they're using for their controller board, or excuse me, their processor. So we're going to find our board in here, which is the MKS Gen L version 2. And then we're going to scroll down and see what's going on. So we're looking for that pin number. So I'm going to search on fan just to see if we can find it. So we have heaters and fans. So this says heater pin. Then we have fan pins down here. So we've got two different fan pins. There's a fan 1 and a fan 2. So I believe it was P2, but let's go back and look. So if we look over on the desktop, we can see that it's fan 1 is P2.4. So let's go back and look at this. So it's P2_04 is our pin. So I'm going to copy that. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go over to the advanced configuration. So I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to go to Config Advanced, and I'm going to search on controller space fan, I think is what it is. And as you can see, it's commented out, so we'll remove the comment. And this one says to cool down the stepper drivers and MOSFETs. So in theory, if we move the fan, it'll control or turn on the fan. So the active speed is going to be rather high. So I'm going to move that to 200. And then we can say the idle speed is, well, we'll say 225, and then, hang on, I got to fix this, 225. We'll do 200 here. I don't know if this will work, but this is just an experiment for me. And then it says the idle time, meaning the steppers are not moving, after disabling the motors. So there's a command that disables the motors. So I'm going to crank this down to 5 seconds just to see what happens. And then of course there's a fan controller menu that you can probably add. I think this goes to the LCD menu, but I don't have the LCD connected right now, so we're not going to worry about that. And then we have to set a controller fan pin. So I'm going to remove the comment, and it's -1 right now. So I'm going to paste what we just copied, being the P2_4. So in theory, a fan will go on to cool the steppers when the steppers are in motion. So let's go back over to the board and actually configure it. So I'm going to go over to the workbench. I'm going to find a fan. This might take me a second because I've got like 8 million fans lying around, but none in the configuration I like. So let's see what I can find. Apparently I chopped off all the fan connectors, so this is going to be slightly challenging. So I did find a fan, but it's slightly bigger than normal, but it should work. So here's the fan I'm going to use. It's not the normal one I would use, and I'm going to connect it to this port right here with the notched connector. And then I'm going to place it, we'll say, well, you got to see what's going on, so I'm going to place it right there. I'm going to put the stepper back in correctly, and we're going to see if this works. So let's go back over to VS Code for a second. Let's plug in the USB to the board, and then I'm going to do an upload in 2 seconds. Hopefully we won't see any errors, but we do. So let's go see what the error is. Let's see. You cannot set the controller fan equal to the fan pin. Interesting. So this is probably going to have to change in number, but let's try a second compile just to see. Okay, it's definitely an issue. So now that we know this is an issue, it has to do with the sanity check. So we're going to move the actual pin. So I'm going to go over here, unplug this for a second, and I'm going to move it to the next connector over and plug it in. Then I'm going to plug this back in, and we're going to change it inside VS Code again. So in VS Code, we'll go to source pins. We'll find our board, which is the LPC 1769, and we'll find our particular board. So there's a fan pin 1 and a fan pin 2. So we may not need to set these, but it's kind of goofy how they do this. So this one is actually a heater in this case, being your second extruder, hot end 1 for fan 3. So we could use that one for this and see if it compiles. So I'm going to copy that and give that a try. So we'll go over to the advanced configuration, We'll paste it right here. And we're just seeing if it compiles. So I'm going to click the checkbox. If this does compile, then we'll change around the configuration. And I'll check on the chat while that's going on. Hear me now? Hang on, let me check to see if the audio is working. How's the sound? Can you hear me? On my side it pegs, so I don't know if it's working on your side. But what I can do is I can open up a browser just to check, see if you can hear like I can hear. So if I go over to YouTube and I open this up, hopefully I can hear myself. But what I can do is I can open up a browser. Yep, so it is working now. How much did you guys miss when I was talking? Well, I'll go back to what I was doing real quick here. Oh, someone said something in chat. So I'm able to hear audio on the web page. Is anybody else having that issue? Okay. So CNC Maker, it may be on your side. It did go out possibly with the USB issues earlier. But reload the web browser and see if it's working. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this pin to what we were going to work with. So I'm going to go back to pins for a second. So if we go up to the pins file, it's 2.06 will compile. So that's the second extruder. So I'm going to show you what it looks like. So let's see, working for YouTube, not my card. Are you talking about, Max? Can you explain your question a little bit more? Are you talking about sound? Or are you talking about your board for the MKS Gen L version 2? So I'm going to set up the fan by copying this. I'm going to go over to configuration, or excuse me, advanced configuration, and paste this over here. Make sure I copy the right thing. Interesting. So what you're seeing here doesn't have multiple hot ends. The fan pin I thought was 2-_4. Yeah, your motor not working. We'll see if we can address that in a second. So, Max, are you saying that your stepper isn't turning? And if you are saying your stepper or your NEMA motor is not stepping, and when you do an M122, what do you see? So, now that we're on the fan again, I'm going to actually plug in a different fan to fix this issue. So, if I go over to the workbench, I'm going to disconnect the power for a moment, pull this fan out because we're going to be using a different port. So you have HE0, HE1. So we're going to set it to HE1. I'm not sure about this, but I have ferrule connectors on this, and there's a plus and a minus. In this case, when you're not using an extruder, you want to line those up. Otherwise, your fan's going to go backwards. So I'm going to loosen the connection for the red side, slide this in and tighten it down. Then I'm going to do the same for the negative side. and hopefully slide this in and screw that down. So Max, if you want to post your configuration on Discord, we can take a look at it. So I got the fan. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over to VS Code and upload it. But first I have to connect the USB, which you're not seeing me do. And I'm going to click the upload button. And in theory, this will copy over. It looks like it did, so let's verify. And it did. So I'm going to close that down. I'm going to go back over to the desktop. I'm going to remove this. And I'm going to plug it back in. Then I'm going to plug in the power. And it looks like the fan is running right now continuously. That might be because we're already in a certain state. But let's see what happens. Because this is not working the way it should. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to connect. The fan appears not to be stopping, which is not what I like to see. So for some reason we've turned on the power, so we're going to disconnect, reconnect. It's not changing the fan, as you can tell. So we're going to move the stepper and see what happens, and hopefully there won't be any magic smoke. Now we're going to do motors off. And apparently that's not very happy. So it's getting continuous power. So one of the things we can probably do is mess around with G-codes, but I don't want to do that. So we're going to actually figure out the other fan issue. This is super weird. It might be that I connected something wrong because it's on full blast. So I'm going to disconnect and take out the power. I'm going to double check my connections, which appear to be good. And I'm going to power down the incomplete system and pop these out. Now this could also be an issue with the actual way they set up the actual firmware. So I'm going to try doing the second one over here. And then going back over and checking things again. So this is going to be a little bit of trial and error. So I'm going to go over to the desktop, bring up the browser. We can see that 1.4 is another pin that we can use. So we'll try that one now. So we'll go back in here. We'll copy this second fan. And we'll paste it right here. And then we'll try and do a build. Hopefully it won't fail. So far it's looking pretty good. And then after this completes, we'll do an upload. And it can't find the disk because I'll show you what's going on. So it's disconnected, so we'll reconnect it. We'll go back over to VS Code. We'll upload again. That looks good. We'll double check to make sure that it's there. And it is. So we'll go back over to the board. Disconnect it, reconnect it, power it up. Looks like the fan is still running, which is a little bit unsettling to me. So we'll connect. It's still running full blast. So there might be a wiring issue with this board, or there might be a setting issue that we've created. So we're going to disable it and re-enable it, but let's try in Pronterface and see if anything changes. So I'm going to move. Apparently it's working just fine. So I'm going to disconnect, reconnect, try motors off. Now there might also be an issue with this version of the firmware because we just figured out earlier that there was user configuration issues with my configuration. So I'm going to disconnect, go back to the workbench, power it down, take this out, and I'm going to do something slightly dangerous, but hopefully it'll look safe when I do it. Your friend is the multimeter. What you got to remember in this case is safety. So I'm going to pull some jumper wires out and use them to figure out what's going on. So I've got a red and a brown. I'm going to connect them accordingly. Actually, this one is the wrong one. It's two males. So we need a male, female. So we're going to go with black and white. So we're going to first check in the browser to see where they are. Inside the browser, you can see that the negative is on top and the positive is on the bottom. So negative is black in this case. So we're going to connect our jumper wires individually. Now this is a little dangerous, so always keep your hands away from anything that's electrified or has load. And right now there is no load. Apparently I can't get the jumper in there. There we go. So that's nice and secure. I'm going to put this over here and I'm going to put a weight on it just so I can control its movement. And then I'm going to take out a multimeter. First I'm going to plug it in and check to see if there's anything coming out. So sometimes I mess this up. So here's the multimeter. Whoop, you can't even see what I'm doing, sorry. So I connected jumper wires over here and connected the power for USB, and I'm going to measure on these with a multimeter. So I'm going to set it first to millivolts. It's probably going to be set to volts, so let's try that. And let's measure it real quick before we do anything. So I'm going to take these probes out. Remember, you don't want to touch these wires together, so they're already too close. So we'll do that. And black is negative. And then red. So right now it's a fraction of a volt. So let's power the system and see what happens. Now we're going to do the same thing again, holding the probes. I know you can't see one of the probes, but that's okay. And it says 9.8 volts direct current. So there's power coming out of those already. So what I'm going to do is change something in the firmware and see what's going on. So I've actually never played with this particular one. So inside the firmware, we're going to disable the fan again. So I'm going to go over to VS Code. Inside VS Code, I'm going to go to controller fan. I'm going to hit Control Z to back out all my changes. it's disabled now. USB is still connected, so we'll try upload. And I'll try and move this so you can see it better. Okay, so let me show you what I'm doing. I'm just making it so you can see the wires. So I'm gonna disconnect the power, reconnect the power, wait for it to connect to the computer. I'm gonna take out the multimeter again, turn that on, plug in the actual device, and we'll measure black and red. So something is occurring in the firmware possibly that's causing it to go on. So let's power this down. We're actually going to switch to the other firmware again. So inside the firmware, we're going to go to VS Code. I'm going to close this down. We have to remember to actually turn on EEPROM. So I'm going to click over here, open folder, downloads, go to the most current that we had open earlier. We already have it set up for most things. So we're going to go to configuration.h, search on EEPROM, enable it, and then we're going to check to see if it steps correctly. We're not going to change the A4988 stuff, so steps per millimeter, which is right down here. So that's still 160, and up here it's still set to 32. So we're just checking EEPROM first, then we'll check the actual other stuff. So I'm gonna do an upload on this and hopefully it'll upload, otherwise we're gonna have to recompile. And I'll check on the chat. Yeah, I can post the files on Discord after this. I can post either the firmware.bin or I can post the actual default Marlin files that have changed. So now that we've got that loaded and it's uploaded, let's go back over and see first if the stepper works. So let me take this back over to the desktop so I can do this correctly. I'm going to disconnect, reconnect, then I'm going to plug it in, make sure that the wires are always where you want them to be. I'm going to go over to Pronterface. Inside Pronterface I'm going to connect. It says it's online. We'll do the M122. It says that it's okay. Let's move 10. It's moving fast, so this might fail. So let's try homing. So we know that it can't do, what is it, 1/32 of a step, because it's going to fail, and it already did. So I'm going to disconnect, power down the system, disconnect, give it a second, reconnect it, wait for the beep, go over to VS Code, and I think the issue was EEPROM is already enabled, so we're going to crank this down back to 16. And we're going to go to configuration.h and put this back to 80. And then we're going to do an upload again. Now, by doing this in so many single steps, changing like one thing or two things, you can tell what the changes are. So there might be something off with the actual fans on this board. They may have fixed it and we don't know it. But we're going to reload the firmware after we confirm that it's there. So let's double check. It's there. So let's go over to the board. I know this is highly iterative. There's a point for me doing this iteratively, and it's more to show you what to think about, because I might already know the solution in some cases, but it's a way for you to understand how to analyze a problem. So I'm going to plug this back in, because you don't want to rush 10 steps and then try and figure out one step. So it's now plugged in. I'm going to go over to Pronterface again. Inside Pronterface, I'll reconnect. I'll check to see that the stepper's okay. I'll try moving 10. It seems to be moving slightly normal, so let's try home. And it's going to fail. So there's something that I forgot to set. And let me bring the camera back on. So somebody in the chat's probably already guessing while I'm doing this, so I'm going to do a disconnect. I'm going to power down the system, because we know it's not the hardware now. We know it's software. So there was something that I did in the other one that I probably didn't do in this one. So let me see if the chat knows before I actually do it. Okay, well, so we know this is set. We know this is set. The only difference was possibly these were commented out. So let's try that too, because we're trying to match up what the diffs are. And let me disconnect the actual power from the board for a second for USB, reconnect it. And I'm going to reload it again. This is just subtracting out differences. There's another way that I've showed how to deal with this. We also need to invert, but I'm not going to do that right away. I'm just trying to match up the two files. So that's loaded. We'll double check to make sure it's good. And you guys weren't seeing what I was doing. Sorry about that. So let's check here. It's loaded. So let's go back over to the desktop. Power it down. Power it back up. Reconnect. All I'm doing is subtracting out variables right now, as weird as it seems. We'll reconnect. Printer is now online. M122 says okay. We'll try moving. Let me move this over a little. Move it 10. It's moving in the opposite direction. Let's try home. And it's going to fail. So let's power down the system again. Disconnect here. And there's a couple of ways to do this to see if there's any diffs that pop out, because we think we have similar configurations. But let's go over to the folder and see if we can see what's going on. So we have two folders over here. We have the 2.7 and the 2.0. So let's make a compare folder. Let's copy part of 2.7. This might be interesting. We'll go inside here. We'll copy this file and I'm probably going to have to rename it anyways. So I'm going to go to compare, I'm going to paste it here, then I'll rename, and I'll change this to 2072, and you'll see why I'm doing this in a second. Then I'll go over and I'll do the same for the other one. So I'll copy this, go back over to here, put it in compare, paste it, copy the last end of this, rename part of this. So that tells us what version we're working with. Now I'll go back over and I'll grab the other one because we'll say that's current. So we're going to copy these two. We'll go back over to here, into compare, paste, and we'll start with config.h and the 2.7 version. Right click. If you don't have this installed, I did a tutorial on it for Tortoise SVN. It's a way to check differences. And these are the differences. So you can see version number is a diff. They've changed some of the verbiage between these. So they're talking about a SKR, where they misspelled something here, or it's a different type of printer I've never heard of. It used to be Delta. That's why I usually ask Delta. Down here, you can see there's an extra serial port. You can see that I'm working with the first one on both. The second one we're not using, and the third one doesn't exist. Down here, there's some more differences. They don't really matter in this case, or shouldn't. There's an additional change here in naming, I think. They also added, looks like more temperature sensors with the new configuration. There's more temperature sensor stuff. There's additional stuff that's added. Looks like a chamber was added down below. But essentially, we're not seeing any real differences between what we worked on yet. So you can see the diffs right here. They're actually the same pretty much, except for spacing. Notice how they changed 4,000 to 400 in the new one. This is how you can tell the differences between builds, by the way. They added some kind of probe. And apparently a Creality Touch was taken out. I don't know if there is a Creality Touch anymore, maybe. And then this has to do with movement. They renamed variables, it looks like. They added a variable, it looks like. This we forgot to invert, but that's not a big deal. They say printer area instead of printer bed now. Filament runout, that has to do with a filament sensor. We're not currently using it, so that should not be a variable. That's G28. They added some stuff. We're not working with that right now. This has to do with bed leveling, I think. Yeah. So a lot of the stuff, just they made changes between the different firmwares. So we're not really concerned with it. I'm looking for more like EEPROM, but I'm taking you through this just so you can see. They added a language, SV. It's probably Slovak or Slavic. Swedish, pardon me. Looks like they took this out in the actual SD card and LCD support. It's probably deprecated, that's why. Or no one's using SPI for video. But it's kind of fast for video. It's a serial peripheral communication. They took or added an LCD, pardon me. But I don't want to get mired down too far in this. I'm just trying to find EEPROM. So let's do a search. EEPROM, because I probably missed it. There it is. So EEPROM is on for both, hasn't changed. So we know that the issue is not in this file probably. Let's see if there's an issue in this one. So right click, diff, the version difference, additional stuff added. Looks like they deprecated some stuff or moved it. Added some more stuff. Looks like they changed the variable name. Cooler fans. This is for the extruder. Looks like they changed around a little bit for the multiplexer or something down in here. Something about inverting directions for the Z stepper. Something about G28. Home first. So this tells what order to home things in, but it might be under a special section. So it depends upon what you're doing. So you may be able to change this around if you so choose, but it's different from the other one. They changed names again. So I think what we're looking for is near the bottom. But the reason I'm doing this is more to show you the thought process between, does it work in the previous build, does it not work? So the rationale behind this is to get you to think about, maybe it already did work and now it's broken, and if it is broken, we may have to open another bug, and we'll see how that goes, because Marlon loves answering bug questions, but I'll show you the procedure they want me to follow. So far I don't see anything really different. And for those that are posting super chats while I'm not looking, thank you very much. So there's something about EEPROM that's new, or I'm sorry, old. I've got these back, well, no, new, pardon me. This is the old version. So we may have to look at that EEPROM setting because that might be new. So let's go back and look at it real quick. So let's see. If both auto bed leveling, so that has to do with bed leveling. We're not using bed leveling at the moment, but that may affect our variable. or it may do other things. But that may be the bug right there. But that's just a theory. We have to test it. So these are additional things. That's new. Filament change and auto pause. Filament change makes more sense than auto pause. These are different steppers. Here's ours. So I changed this back to 16 up here. There is a spacing difference, but that doesn't matter because this is comment from here on. And over here it's the same. Interpolation is new, but we're not using it. So I'm just rolling through these settings trying to find information. That's why it looks so weird. So we're not using the stepper type, but you can see that they have diffs between them. We're not using an air evacuation system, but it's new. We're not using a laser, but that's new. More laser stuff. I know this is incredibly boring, but this is what you got to do to find out what's going on. So I don't see any major differences yet, except for that EEPROM. Okay, so we've essentially reached the end. So let's go back and search on EEPROM, because that looks like a diff. So EEPROM, and let's see what that was. So it's probably back up. Let me move this over. Okay, so this is what I suspect is an issue. So let's go find it. So I'm gonna grab optimize mesh storage. I don't know if this is gonna solve the problem or create another one. So let's go over here. Let's go over to advanced config, do a search on that string. It's right here. So I'm gonna remove the comment, and then I'm going to try and compile and hopefully not get an error. If we get an error, it may mean that there's a sanity check that goes with it. And while that's compiling, I'll double check the chat because I know I've been vacant for a few moments. Okay, it's finished compiling, but I need to go over the board and plug it back in. So I'm going to plug this back in. Then I'm going to go back over to VS Code and do an upload. I'm going to double check to make sure the upload worked. Did. Go back over to the board. Disconnect. Reconnect. Connect the power. Be aware that you have these out that are live when you plug it in, or not, because they're not showing up at the moment. And let's connect back in Pronterface and see what's going on here. So in Pronterface, I'm going to connect. I'm going to check the status. Looks like it's good. I'm going to move the stepper 10. Now I'm going to try homing. So that's not the issue. So I think they broke something in the MKS. I could probably also check the SKR because we may have fan issues on this one. But I don't know if they're actual physical or not. So I'm going to disconnect and I'm going to power it down for a second. We'll check the fan real quick and then I'm going to move over to a different board and see if this is common between different board types. So let's go over to the workbench for a second. Disconnect this, reconnect it. Then we'll go over to the desktop. We'll check our fan pin again because they may have fixed this issue and I just don't know it. So that was advanced config and it was controller fan. Which is right here. So let's remove the comment. Let's remove the comment here. We're going to leave everything else default. And we're going to go find the actual pins configuration. So it's source pins 1769. Find our board. And then we find our pins. I may have scrolled by it, but here we go. Let's try 2.4. Let's copy that. Go back over to config advanced. Paste it where the -1 is. And let's try compiling and seeing what happens. And it's failing miserably. So let's try a different pin. So we're going to try fan 2. So we're going to copy that. Go back over to the advanced config. Paste it here. And compile again. All I'm doing is running through the actual pins to see what works and what doesn't. Because we're using HE1. And it doesn't make a lot of sense on this board, but that's the way it is. So it worked. So let's try and upload. That worked. So I'm going to go back over to the board. I'm going to skip a step. Hopefully the camera won't click off in a second. Plug it back in. And I'm going to power it up. Looks like the actual light is out, which is good. So let's go over to Pronterface. And let's connect to the board. I'm going to check the voltage real quick though. So remember to take your time with this. So right now it says almost 0. So let's go over to connect to the board. Let's do an M122. Let's move the stepper and see what happens. Light goes on. And it's 12 volts. So there was an error in Marlin that possibly caused that issue. So let's test it with an actual fan. So let's do a motors off and see if the light goes out. 1, 1000, 2, 1000, 3, 1000, 4, 1000, 5, 1000, 6, 1000, 7. Oh, it's going to do 60 seconds. So I'm just going to stop it. So I'm disconnecting. I'll power down the system. I'm going to pop out as soon as this discharges. So I'm going to take this out, pull these, put this back over here, leave the pins over here, grab the fan that we originally were working with. I know this is horrible, but... And it's fan 2, I think, so let's double check that. So let me go over to VS Code. Inside VS Code, we're going to go back to the pins. It says fan 2 1.4, so we'll go back over to the actual website. 1.4 is fan 2, which is right here. So let's go back and hook it up. So let's plug it in right here. This might move around when it's plugged in. I'm going to plug this in so we can load firmware, but we don't need to. So I'm going to plug this in direct power wise. Fan is not running, so let's go over to Pronterface and see what happens. This is still going to run for 60 seconds, so maybe I'll change that first. So let me power down the system. We'll go over and we'll make those changes real quick. So in VS Code, we're going to go to Advanced Configuration. We've already got this set, so we're going to set the speed, not today, but we'll set 5 seconds. We'll upload this to the board because it's got USB power still. Let me double check the connection over here. It's disconnected. So between the two different firmwares, there's different issues. This board came out midway through this firmware coming out, so I'm going to plug it back in after I disconnect the power. So I'll show you what I'm doing. So I'm going to pull the power, reconnect the power, then I'm going to plug it in. The fan is on, which is kind of creepy. Now it's off. So let's go over to Pronterface and see what happens, because it should be 5 seconds after the fan is disabled. So inside here I'm going to connect. Fan is still not running. So I'm going to move the stepper. And the fan goes on, as you can see right here. So now I'm going to say motor's off and give it 5 seconds. So 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000, 4 1000, 5 1000. And the fan stops. So it's functional there. So apparently there may be a bug or something I don't understand occurring with the steppers on this version of Marlin. But on the previous version of Marlin, it appears to be working. So I'll show you the process for this. It's going to be fun. Go over to, let's see, the web page. So I'm going to go to browser. On the browser, I'm going to go to Marlin. I'm going to go to report an issue. And we'll look on MKS Gen L. Search on that. So there's something going on with the MKS Gen L, but reporting an issue, say new issue. Let's see what we got here. Create a bug report. Let's see what we get. So, before reporting a bug, read and understand code of conduct. So, code of conduct is probably be polite. But supporting links, Marlin documentation, Facebook, Marlin Discord, Marlin discussion forum. Never used this before. And then Marlin videos on YouTube. Great for new users. Apparently it's probably not going to be me. Interesting. Very interesting. Oh, there is something on me. How about that? Anywho, sorry I got off on a tangent. So, discussion forums. So, let's look for it here, which is MKS Gen L. It may take a second. Looks like someone talked about something with TMC 2209s 7 days ago. Obviously they're speaking in, I think, German. So let's go to it. It might not be German. So obviously most of you don't speak German. I think it is. It might be Dutch. Or it could be Portuguese. So we'll go to translate and see if we can figure it out. Detect a language, paste. So it is German. So hello everybody, I have a problem that I can't solve. The printer I built last ran a whole time, blah 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 blah. The whole thing goes very well quietly. Not a switch, current, blah blah blah. Let me turn the camera on while that's there. All is not good. So he's saying something might be broken. So it may be a good situation to have someone new open a bug like Max or TT and try this out in Marlin. They love when I report a bug. So essentially there's a bug. I'm gonna report it for now. You guys can watch them yell at me. So we'll say MKS Gen L version 2.0 does not home with sensorless homing. So essentially I'm saying what the issue is in version 2.0.8.1 verse 2.0.7.2. Okay, so code of conduct we kind of went through. It's be nice. So down here, Marlin does not work. What I want to say here is sensorless homing fails in Marlin 2.0.8.1 and works in Marlin version 2.0.71. Now it wants me to give information on both that I'm working with. So what I need to do is go over here to my VS Code. I'm going to close out of this for a second. I'm just going to upload the two configs. They can figure it out. I hear they're pretty smart. So I'm going to go over to my downloads folder and I'm going to zip. Well, I'm going to delete these for now. And I'm going to zip these two up. So I'm going to say send to compressed zip drive. So inside here it might be confusing because they're both in here. So I'm going to simplify this. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to zip these individually. So send to compressed. send to compress. And then I'm going to highlight and copy both these. I'm going to go back over to Marlin's website. I'm going to paste these in, where I'm going to have to drag them, sorry. And we'll give that a second, see if they both get up there. Apparently there might be an issue with their website. There we go. So let's see. I think both versions went up. You can see right here. Now it's just doing the second one. So in theory they're both there. Is this a new bug or an old issue? New bug. Expected behavior. Sensorless homing. Works on both firmware configurations for MKS Gen L version 2.0. Steps to reproduce. This is what you're going to do for the actual steps. So in this case, download Marlin firmware from marlinfw.org. They want that because they're going to tell you not to use the company one, being MKS Gen L. So tell them that right away. So we're going to say step 1. Then we'll go to the end of the line, see if it says step 2. It doesn't, so we'll say step 2. Extract firmware. Step 3. Open in VS Code. So I'm doing the obvious steps because they're going to think that obviously I didn't test this, or I did something wrong, which is highly possible because it's happened before. So I'm going to say www.marlinfirmware.org. Then I'm going to say step 4. Let's see. Edit platform io.ini for default environment. Of course I can't spell. To be from, what is it? Mega 2560 to LPC 1769. Step 5. Let's see. Change motherboard type for MKS Gen L version 2, and then I'll put in parentheses what the actual name is because they'll think I did it wrong. So I'll click over here, I'll reopen it real quick. So downloads. Oh, I'll use the other one because that's precise. I'll go to, whoop, I'm already there. So I'm going to go to config.h. I'm going to search. I love when that happens. I'm going to search on motherboard. I'm going to say what it is because they're obviously going to question it. And I'll put it in here. Then I'll say, let's see, step 6. They may question this step as well. And I'll copy this. Step 7, I'm just showing them the steps as I go. I know this is extremely boring to watch. Search on A4988. Copy this. Paste it here. Step 9. Hopefully they can figure out I'm on a different config. Well, 8, pardon me. On configuration underscore ADV. Whoop, I gotta do EEPROM, don't I? Step 8. Enable EEPROM. .h add or enable TMC debugs. Step 10. Enable sensorless homing. And set sensitivity to 125 for X axis. Correct my spelling. Okay. And then, let's see. Steps to reproduce. I think that's pretty accurate. That covers most of it. Follow normal process for configuration. Jumpers for MKS Gen L, V2 for UART on X axis, and sensorless homing jumper for X min. I think that's pretty accurate. So now that we've got that covered, let's see, version of the firmware, see about menu on LCD, or the output of M115 for older releases. We only did partial critical bugs. Printer is board tested on desk. Electronics MKS Gen L version 2.0 V3. Add-ons, let's see, playlist, the hardware involved, let's see, MakerBase, TMC 2209 v2.0. Slicer doesn't really matter. We're not using it. Host software is Pronterface. Found a German bug addressing similar issue on RepRap forum, and then I'll give a reference because they won't know what I'm talking about. So let's go over to RepRap forum. Did I lose it? Here we go. Copy and paste it here. So we're good there. And then I'll give them a reference to the website so they can look this stuff up. And then we'll enjoy the fun of them screaming at me about something. And then let's give them the YouTube video just to possibly irritate them. So let me pull that up real quick. And then let's give them the YouTube video just Sorry for the echo. Issue. They're not going to watch 2-hour video. But expected behavior I skipped, which is sensorless homing would work like Marlin version 2.0.7.2. So that's pretty rude of me, so I'm gonna do a submit new, and it's probably not gonna like this because I'm not logged in. Or I missed something. Awesome. Remember, I'm trying to figure out what I did wrong, and I think it has to do with creating a bug, choose different types. This might not be intuitive. So I'm going to make a copy of this real quick. So I'm going to duplicate this. This way if I lose something, we'll know. So it says I'm logged in. So what did I fill out wrong? I'll look at the chat and find out in a second. Section. Yes, this problem still exists. I'll see what you guys think in a second because I know I'm missing something. Let me take a look here. So I guess this is a beta system, meaning it doesn't work. So this is what we're gonna do. Go back. We'll go back again. Go over to here and try it this way. Reporting an issue. New issue. That's amazing. Of course they have very little bugs. Anybody see what I'm doing wrong here, or is it just me? Up, firmware version 2.0.8.1. Yep, I found it. So, any minute now, they'll give me a response back saying it's not an issue or I didn't follow a procedure. So, wait and watch. Here's the link for everyone to have fun with. I don't know if this will post well in the chat, but you can have fun watching the response. I'll try and be polite, responding back like usual, but usually people can be slightly arrogant about it. So we'll see what happens. But we're now, what is it, 2 hours and 15 minutes into this. I hope I answered everybody's questions. I will post on Discord the firmware.bin for 2.0.7.2 for Max to try out for his board, and we'll see if that works. But I've been talking for 2 hours and 15 minutes, and obviously it's been entertaining watching me troubleshoot a problem and seeing what issues occurred. We also have a fan issue that if someone wants to report that would be great. But that's in an older version, so it doesn't really matter. But for those that have been doing the super chats and I've been missing them, thank you very much. Those that are doing Patreon, thank you very much. And those that do PayPal, thank you very much. Everyone take care, be safe, and wear a mask and get vaccinated as soon as you can. Ciao.